Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, August 5th. This is Africa 54.
USAID Chief Samantha Powers voices concerns about dehumanizing rhetoric in Ethiopia amid war in the Tigray region. The World Health Organization sounds the alarm on attacks against healthcare workers and patients. And in Burkina Faso, the unintended consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Powers, during stops in Sudan and Ethiopia, has starkly contrasted the trajectory of the two countries. Powers says Sudan is on a fragile path to democracy, while Ethiopia is mired in conflict and facing famine. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Saine reports.
The humanitarian crisis is growing in Ethiopia, and thousands are fleeing to neighboring Sudan. The U.S. is pushing for humanitarian access to millions in desperate need of food and medical supplies due to the fighting in Ethiopia's northern Tigray and other regions that has been raging since last November. The head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Powers, traveled to Ethiopia and recalled a visit to Sudan 20 years ago when she never imagined it would become an inspiration.
But thanks to a youth-driven and largely peaceful revolution, one led primarily by Sudan's women, the country is now experiencing a fragile yet hopeful transition to a civilian-led democracy. In Ethiopia, a long-standing partner of the United States, the case is starkly different. A country that has been home to some of the most impressive development gains and economic growth anywhere on the continent, and a regional anchor of stability and security, now finds itself mired in conflict. The government's brutal campaign against the people of Tigray has put the country's people at risk of a prolonged civil war, and the people of Tigray at grave risk of imminent famine.
United Nations humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths said blanket accusations against humanitarian relief agencies, such as the ones made by an Ethiopian official, are dangerous. Adote Akwai of Amnesty International told VOA he agrees.
The rhetoric attacking the principle of humanitarian assistance really shakes and threatens the whole network of laws and conventions and obligations that were created to really try to prevent the worst from being done to people. But it also creates a dangerous kind of atmosphere that allows attacks against humanitarian operations and humanitarian workers, which is equally dangerous.
Akwe told VOA that other countries need to realize how serious the situation in Ethiopia is.
I think the Biden administration has been fairly clear and unambiguous in its leadership and what it's tried to do and call for in Ethiopia. It's time for the rest of the UN Security Council and other African governments to step up and realize that, this is a country that is now potentially going to fragment, and that's going to have major implications for Sudan, Djibouti, Somaliland, Eritrea.
The United Nations has also voiced its frustration at blockages and delays in getting humanitarian aid into Ethiopia's northern Tigray to deal with what it calls the catastrophic situation there. UNICEF says that more than 100,000 children in Tigray could suffer life-threatening malnutrition in the next 12 months. Cindy Saine, VOA News.
South Sudanese Vice President Riek Machar has been ousted as head of his party and its armed forces. The party's military wing says Machar was removed following a 3-day gathering of senior SPLM AIO leaders in the country's far north. A statement signed by the military leadership dated August 3rd revealed Machar had engaged in a year-long policy of divide and rule and favored nepotism over unity or advancing their cause. Machar served as vice president in South Sudan's first post-independence government alongside his old rival, President Salva Kiir, but the pair fell out and Machar was fired 2 years later. Troops loyal to each man turned their guns on each other, and a 5-year civil war followed before a truce was declared in 2018. Machar entered another unity government as deputy to President Kiir in early 2020, but the lingering political divisions have plunged the nation into an economic and humanitarian crisis. A United Nations World Health Organization report is revealing that hundreds of thousands of workers and patients have been killed or injured in the last few years. Soraya Ali explains.
More than 700 healthcare workers and patients have died in attacks on health facilities since December 2017, and more than 2,000 have been wounded. That's according to a 3-year analysis by the World Health Organization released on Tuesday. The WHO's surveillance system for attacks on healthcare recorded incidents from 17 countries and hostile environments from 2018 to 2020. Several African countries, including Ethiopia, Mozambique, Nigeria, Central African Republic and Somalia, were on the list. Altaf Musani, the WHO's director of the Health Emergencies Interventions, says these attacks have long-lasting impacts.
Their impact reverberates on healthcare workers' mental health and willingness to report to work, equally on communities' willingness to seek healthcare, and also drastically reduces resources for responding to a health crisis, amongst others.
The findings are the first body of verified and reliable evidence on attacks on healthcare, according to the UN. The WHO initiative seeks to collect evidence of attacks, advocate for their end, and promote good practices for protecting healthcare. Mr. Musani called on all parties in conflicts to ensure safe working spaces for the delivery of healthcare services and safe access to healthcare free from violence, threat, or fear.
That was Soraya Ali of Reuters reporting. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is leading to cuts in foreign aid from donors like Great Britain. Britain this month slashed its aid budget by $5.5 billion. The funding loss is being felt in Burkina Faso, where it could possibly shut down a group that helps thousands of gender-based violence and rape survivors. Henry Wilkins reports from Kaya, Burkina Faso.
Marie Ouedraogo, whose name has been changed to protect her identity, fled her village in northern Burkina Faso when gunmen linked to the Islamic State attacked. She trekked through the bush for 3 days seeking refuge, but was then seized by a group of terrorists.
They told me to put my daughter down, and one of them hit me with the back of his gun, and I fell to the ground. All of them raped me. There were 6 of them. When they finished, they discussed whether they should kill me, but they decided it is useless to kill a woman. They got on their motorbikes and left.
When she reached the relative safety of Kaya the next day, she was directed to the non-profit group Marie Stopes. Marie Stopes provides family planning for women in countries undergoing humanitarian crises like Burkina Faso's, which has displaced more than 1.3 million people.
The woman from Marie Stopes immediately gave me some morning after pills and gave me advice as well. I was still traumatized. I could neither eat nor breastfeed my daughter. The lady encouraged me to eat the food she gave me and told me that my life is still worth living.
Marie Stopes is primarily supported by British aid money, but Britain has cut its annual aid budget, and so have other countries such as Australia, Japan and Saudi Arabia. This will impact Marie Stopes in Burkina Faso.
We think that with these cuts, these beneficiaries will be left on their own because we do not have the funding to be able to support them. And also, many of our support workers will be out of a job.
The cuts will affect large numbers of women, says the head of Marie Stopes, Burkina Faso.
Overall, we've been able to record more than 500,000 beneficiaries over 2 years. I would also like to point out Burkina Faso's global context of insecurity, which makes women even more vulnerable.
The largest international non-profits say the shockwaves of the cuts will be felt by people across Africa in all kinds of situations and will result in deaths.
So for countries like the UK and others to be cutting their aid budgets during a global pandemic is extremely short-sighted, and we know it will put the fight back against poverty by many decades. So the UN Secretary General, for example, called these cuts a death sentence, and it really is that stark for many people.
Marie Stopes in Burkina Faso could be forced to close most or all of its outreach programs next year if it does not get its funding. For women who fall victim to gang rape, like Ouedraogo, it will mean they may no longer receive emergency birth control or support. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Kaya, Burkina Faso.
Since the U.S. Voting Rights Act was signed into law 56 years ago, removing barriers to voting by African Americans, the face of the American electorate has evolved. During the 2020 election, Asian Americans made their voices heard. VOA's Elizabeth Lee has the details.
From the West Coast to the East Coast, Asian Americans in major U.S. cities flexed their political muscle in the 2020 presidential and congressional elections, contributing to a record voter turnout across the nation.
Asian Americans have really come into prominence as a new electoral force to be reckoned with.
The turnout of Asian American voters hit a record high of nearly 60% in 2020, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. More than half of them supported Democrat Joe Biden over Republican incumbent Donald Trump, and more Asian Americans favored Democrats than Republicans. Researchers say one reason for the historic increase in Asian American voter turnout over 2016 levels was a response to a wave of hate incidents against Asians in the U.S.
A number of studies have looked at the impact of feeling discriminated against, a sense of social exclusion, and how that really galvanizes Asian Americans to go out and get registered, to participate in elections.
Another record set, 21 Asian Americans elected to Congress in 2020, the most in the nation's history, and another incentive for Asians to head for the ballot box.
Every election cycle, we've seen an increase of Asian American and Pacific Islander participation. And every time that we see Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders on the ballot, it also increases voter turnout.
But researchers say Asian Americans are still underrepresented in public offices. Asians and Pacific Islanders make up 6% of the U.S. population, but make up less than 1% of elected officials. One factor, according to Pew Research and the U.S. Census, more than 70% of Asian American adults were born in another country. Some speak limited English, says Congresswoman Judy Chu, the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress.
We are a population where many may not be familiar with the American means of democracy. It takes a little while to get used to it, to know that your voice counts, and especially if you come from countries where there aren't real free and fair elections, or maybe where there are no elections at all.
Newly elected in 2020, Michelle Steele of California became one of the first Korean American women in Congress. She remembers the challenges of running for office as an immigrant.
Since I was born in Korea and raised in Japan, I have very shy personality. So it's harder to go out there with my accent than speaking in front of the people.
As more Asian Americans enter politics, Asian American voters are becoming more interested and engaged.
We want to see people that look like us on TV in positions of power and can spread the message and build the coalition and allyship that's needed for real change.
The change includes a new hate crimes law passed this year that addresses the rise in violence against Asian Americans. But not everyone is optimistic that changes will continue.
We see that as there is a rise in Asian hate, yes, we are being recognized more by politicians, but I feel like once that is subsides, we probably will be in the shadows once again.
The Pew Research Center projects that Asian Americans will become the largest group of immigrants in the U.S. by 2055.
It's no longer a population that's quiet and not going to vote. They turned out in record numbers in 2020, and you don't go back once you become activated.
Transforming a group traditionally marginalized by campaigns into a voting bloc that can potentially be the margin of victory in a political race. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News.
Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Zambia gears up for presidential elections. We'll hear from an opposition candidate and a spokesman for the ruling party. Stay with us. Welcome back. Zambia is set to hold its presidential elections on August 12th. The presidential candidate for the opposition People's Alliance for Change, Ford Mayele Banda, is predicting that none of the 16 candidates will meet the 50% plus one vote threshold needed to be declared winner of the election. VOA's Peter Claudio, on special assignment in Zambia, sat down with candidate Banda in Lusaka.
What are your views about the upcoming elections?
Our views are simple. The upcoming general elections, we believe and we know that the people of Zambia are looking for something fresh, something different. They want change. And I think we have traveled across the country. The feeling is the same. Of course, people have learned their lessons from 2011, where they just jumped, just to bring about change. But this time, people are saying, we want real change. And I think that's our view, and those are the dynamics in this election.
Now, your party is talking about jobs, land, and empowerment. If Zambians repose confidence in you to become the next president, within the first year, what would you have done, or what would you do?
In the first 1 year, we shall ensure that we create policies that would spur job creation, and these policies are simple. We need to stabilize the mining sector. There's so much instability in the mining sector, whereas a lot of jobs have been lost. So we need to make sure that there's a lot of stability, so that those investors that are coming to this country are guaranteed of some greater levels of stability in the economy. Right now, as we speak, the government is running 2 mines, not because the government should run the mines, but because investors don't have confidence in the current government. So we want to bring that confidence in this country, so that we can bring more investors, so that they can create more jobs. We also need to make sure that we have come up with a system of land redistribution and distribution. As we speak, a lot of land in this country is owned by few people. Most Zambians don't have access to land. So we need to come up with a platform for every Zambian to make sure that they have access to land.
Do you trust the Electoral Commission of Zambia to administer free, fair, transparent, and credible elections on August 12th?
That's a very difficult question, because one thing we've noticed is that there's been so much difficulties in engaging with stakeholders. The Electoral Commission of Zambia has portrayed a situation which, for lack of better terms, like they're in bed with the ruling government. Well, we cannot complain too much, because there are a lot of things that they don't have a choice but to do. So we can say we trust them to a certain extent. But what we're confident about is that, the voice of the people will be louder than the voice of those that want to manipulate the elections.
The last election, your party or you placed fourth. Going into this election, I hear you could be third. What specifically are your prospects of winning these elections, presidentially, if I may?
The prospects are quite high. The people want change. And the people want real change. Looking at the consistency of our party in the last 5 years, having participated in various by-elections and being placed number 3 going to this election, it gives us a good opportunity to be the alternative Of course, there's some other people in the opposition who think they have won the election, but they're forgetting that people also want an alternative, and we are the alternative. And we know that, the ruling government, they'll get, very few votes. And this is the history of this country. When people are dissatisfied with a ruling party, they really punish them.
And I have spoken with some Zambians since I've been here. There are 16 presidential candidates contesting, 15 trying to unseat the president. Some people are saying you pretty much have the same objective. Why are you not coming together to have a united front? They cited instances of neighboring Malawi where they came out and defeated incumbent President Professor Tabitha Mutharika. It was in Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone. Why are you not doing it here in Zambia?
The constitution is clear. If someone doesn't get 50+1, you go in the rerun. So I think that our democracy demands that we fulfill the constitutional obligations. Then, if one doesn't get the 50+1, the winner doesn't get the 50+1, then we can sit. It gives us a good opportunity, as the opposition, to make sure that the policies that we've been preaching are adopted in the coalition, as opposed to just agreeing before the election.
What is your message to the people of Zambia as they head to the polls on August 12th?
My message and the message of the party to the people of Zambia is to make sure that we deliver real change. What happened in 2011 was that people were just angry and they just wanted to change, to say, okay, who is likely to beat this one? Let's bring this one. And today again they're saying they want change. If they bring about the wrong change, in the next 5 years they'll be crying for change again. So it is an opportunity for us as a country to ensure that we deliver the right change. And the right change, of course, is with the People's Alliance for Change.
That was VOA's Peter Clotty speaking in Lusaka with the opposition People's Alliance for Change candidate and Ford Mayele Banda. Zambia's ruling Patriotic Front Party says incumbent President Edgar Lungu is providing leadership, has kept his promises to Zambians, and he deserves another 5-year term. This despite criticism that he has failed to resolve the myriad of challenges the country is facing. Let's hear from Antonio Muanza, the media director of the ruling Patriotic Front Party.
What are the prospects of the president winning re-election, really, if I may ask you?
Well, this election for President Edgar Chagwa Lungu is simply a formality to fulfill the constitutional requirement to have those elections every 5 years. The president doesn't have real competition. The president will scoop these elections by more than 50% plus one threshold as required by the constitution. Why do I say so? It's because the Patriotic Front's leadership in the last 10 years cannot be equaled to the previous governments that have been there. So in terms of economic development, starting with infrastructure development, road networks, telecommunication, housing, hospitals, schools, universities, this government has performed tremendously beyond the expectations of many Zambians. So our record in the last 10 years has been very clear in terms of transformative economic development.
Antonio, what is the president's key campaign message?
So the campaign message of the president has been broken into two parts. First of all, the president has continued to point at what his administration and the Patriotic Front government has done in the last 10 years. The tremendous economic and social transformative agenda that we have achieved as a party in the last 10 years. Secondly, the second part of the president's message has been the economic recovery plan in the wake of the COVID-19. The president is aware that most of the Zambian people have been affected very negatively as a result of the COVID-19. The president is aware of the economic challenges a lot of Zambians are going through in terms of the cost of living and the high prices of essential goods and services. And the president is pointing out to the people of Zambia to his economic recovery plan to make sure that Zambia is able to have a sustainable and resilient economy, and also make sure that Zambia become an industrialized nation to reduce on the dependence on imports, which have got a direct effect on the price of commodities and prices of services.
The opposition groups are saying that the president has failed to transform the lives of the people, and that the economy is facing a lot of headwinds caused by his lack of leadership, his failure to resolve the economic challenges facing the country. They talk about public debt that aren't being serviced properly, and that he should not get a second term. How do you respond to such criticisms?
Well, sometimes the opposition don't want to be realistic. In the first place, Zambia, before 2011, before the Patriotic Front came into office, was a village. We had a failing public housing system, failing economic system, failing school system, health system. Everything was broken down. What we did, first of all, was to borrow in order to build. So we borrowed to build the road infrastructure network that we need to put up industries, to put up factories. We borrowed to put up the communication infrastructure, and today Zambians across the country are able to communicate and transact via phones and via the internet. We borrowed in order to build schools, to build hospitals, to build universities. We borrowed for production and not for consumption.
Accepting the results of an election, it's a key part of the election process. The opposition parties have said that the ECZ, or the Electoral Commission of Zambia, appear to be favoring the Patriotic Front. Will the Patriotic Front accept the outcome of this year's election, irrespective of who wins?
First of all, Patriotic Front is a very democratic party. It's not the first time that we are participating in elections. We have participated in elections since 2001, and we have always accepted the will of the people. The will of the Zambians is what matters, and whatever the outcome, the Patriotic Front is committed to uphold that. If we don't agree with the outcome, there are enough avenues that have been put in the Constitution. You can go to court and petition and produce evidence of rigging, and if the court believes that the election was stolen from you, the Constitution provides for mechanisms to redress or address any grievances that anyone can have. But I want to end by saying this. First of all, we know that the opposition are using two strategies to delegitimize the outcome of this election. So what they're doing two things. They're using violence to intimidate our people so that our people do not turn out. They're banking on voter apathy as a strategy. Number two, they're using violence in order to have a premise that they can use to say these elections were not free and fair, they were violent. So it is a strategy to attack the institutions of government, the institutions that run and manage the elections, so that they can use this as a premise to justify their outcry of rigging. There is no rigging.
That was VOA's Peter Claudy speaking with Antonio Muanza, the media director of the ruling Patriotic Front Party in Lusaka, Zambia. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.